As is the case in most Indian villages, the main production activity in Palampur is farming. Around 75% of the working population in Palampur is engaged in farming. These include farmers and farm laborers. The welfare of the farming community is directly dependent on farm production. The more the production, the happier the farmers and farm laborers. So, how do we increase farm production? Well, there are two ways of doing it. One way to increase farm production is to increase the land area under cultivation. The other way to increase farm production is to adopt methods that allow you to grow more crops on the same land. Let us explore both these possibilities. Let us start with the possibility of increasing the land resource for cultivation. Land is a limited resource. We require land not just to grow crops, but to build houses, industries, public spaces, schools and hospitals, etc. Thus, it is difficult to increase the land area under cultivation. The only way to increase land under cultivation is to convert wastelands into cultivable land. However, wasteland is also limited, so this method can only increase the farmland marginally. What is true for Palampur is largely true for the whole of India. Observe in this graph how total land under cultivation in India increased only marginally between 1950 and 1970. Between 1970 and 2000, the land area under cultivation remained unchanged. Note that the land area in the table is mentioned in million hectares. Hectare is the standard unit of measuring land area and is equal to the area of a square having a side of 100 meters. Thus, 1 hectare is equal to 10,000 square meters. Since we cannot substantially increase the land area under cultivation, let us see how we can grow more crops on the same land to increase farm production. You can grow more crops on the same land in two ways. You can either adopt multiple cropping or use modern farming methods. Let us discuss both these ways in detail. Let us start with multiple cropping. Farmers in Palampur grow jawar and bajra during the monsoon or kharif season. These crops are used as cattle feed. After harvesting jawar and bajra, the farmers grow potato in their fields between October and December. After the potato harvest, the farmers sow wheat in the winter season, which they harvest before the monsoon the next year. A part of the land in Palampur is used to grow sugarcane that takes about a year to grow. Thus, in a period of 1 year, farmers in Palampur grow 3 crops on the same land. This method of growing 2 or more crops on the same land in a year is called multiple cropping. Farmers in Palampur can grow multiple crops in a year because they are not dependent on rains for irrigation. They have access to electric-powered tube wells to irrigate their fields. All villages in India are not as fortunate as Palampur. Less than 40% of the cultivated area in India is irrigated and is primarily in the northern and coastal plains. In regions like the Deccan Plateau, farmers are still largely dependent on rainfall for cultivation. Now let us learn about modern farming methods to increase farm production and how these methods are different from traditional methods of cultivation. Before we proceed, let us understand how farm production is measured. Farm production is measured as yield, which is the total quantity of crop produced on a piece of land in 1 year. Till the 1960s, crops were grown using traditional seeds that required less irrigation and grew well with natural manure made from cattle dung. Traditional farming is less expensive as the farmer does not have to buy too many things, but it produces a lower yield of crop. The Green Revolution in the 1960s introduced modern farming methods that used high-yielding varieties, or HYV, of seeds that required a lot of water and the application of chemical fertilizers and pesticides. Modern farming is more expensive as the farmer has to purchase HYV seeds, fertilizers and pesticides, and also has to pay for electricity and for the installation of tube wells for irrigation. However, the crop yield is very high as compared to traditional farming. With increasing yield, big farmers invested in farm machinery like tractors and harvesters. These machines speeded up the work, but increased the farmer's expenditure on fuel and maintenance. The high-yield seeds used in modern farming produce more grain on each plant as compared to traditional seeds. This is how farmers get a higher yield through modern farming. Farmers in Punjab, Haryana and western Uttar Pradesh were the first to adopt modern farming methods in India, and their yield got more than doubled. The Green Revolution in India was more successful for some crops than the others. This chart clearly shows that while wheat production in India has increased manifold, the production of pulses has not changed much. Of late, people have started associating several adverse environmental and economic effects with modern farming methods. Let us take a look at them. Prolonged use of large quantities of chemical fertilizers and pesticides kills useful bacteria in the soil, leading to soil degradation and a decrease in the natural fertility of soil. Chemical fertilizers and pesticides percolate through the ground to pollute the precious groundwater resources. Excessive use of groundwater for irrigation through tube wells has reduced the water table in many areas. With decreasing soil fertility, farmers are forced to use more and more fertilizers to maintain their production levels. This is increasing the cost of production for farmers and decreasing their income. Thus, we need to adopt modern farming methods with care for sustainable farm production. We have discussed multiple cropping and modern farming as two ways to increase farm production. However, farm production also depends on how much land a farmer has. Let us see how cultivable land is divided amongst farmers in Palampur. Around 1/3 of the families in Palampur are landless. Here is an aerial view of the farms in Palampur. Observe that there are a large number of small fields and a few large ones. Over 50% of the farmers who own land cultivate small fields less than 2 hectares in area. These farmers find it difficult to produce surplus crops that they can sell in the market. The large fields that comprise a major portion of the cultivable land in Palampur are owned by a small group of families. Some of them have fields in excess of 10 hectares in size. The situation in Palampur reflects the general situation of land division across India as shown by these figures. Across India, 80% of the farmers are small farmers who cultivate only 36% of the total cultivable land in the country. In comparison, 20% of medium and large farmers own 64% of the total cultivable land in India. Division of land through succession and inheritance is another reason for many farmers having smaller fields. Take the example of Sujan Singh. He owned a field of 5 hectares in size. Sujan Singh produced enough on his land to live a comfortable life. Sujan Singh had 4 sons, Hari, Shyam, Sundar and Bhola. After Sujan Singh's death, his land was equally divided between his 4 sons. Thus, Hari, Shyam, Sundar and Bhola each got a field just 1.25 hectares in size. Today, none of them can sustain their family with such a small field to cultivate. Farming requires hard work. Thus, after land, labor is the most important requirement for cultivation. Small farmers work in their own fields with the help of their families. Medium and large farmers hire landless workers or small farmers to work in their fields in exchange for small wages or a small share of the crop. Farm workers find different kinds of work like sowing, planting, harvesting and threshing at different times of the year. They may be employed on daily wages or for a whole year. Farm laborers lead a difficult life. Most of them have loans to repay. There is no job security, and payments are much less than the government stipulated 60 rupees per day. With farm machines taking over most of the manual work done in the fields, farm laborers find it increasingly difficult to find jobs. Many of them migrate to other states to find work. Along with land and labor, the third important requirement for farming is the capital or money required for cultivation. We have already seen that modern farming methods require a farmer to spend more on farming. A farmer can earn money only by selling his produce. Small farmers grow just enough crops to feed their families. They are left with little or nothing to sell to arrange for the capital required to grow another crop. Thus, small farmers in Palampur are forced to borrow money from big farmers or local money lenders. Besides paying a high rate of interest, small farmers also have to work as farm laborers for large farmers to repay their loan. The large farmers, on the other hand, produce a lot more than their own requirement. The large farmers in Palampur sell their surplus wheat to traders in Raiganj at a good profit. The large farmers deposit their money in banks or lend it to small farmers. The large farmers also use their surplus profits to acquire new fixed capital assets like farm machinery. The large farmers are also investing money in non-farming activities like transport and shops. Thus, while the rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer in Palampur.